Chapter 20. Bueller and First Squad approached the mound cautiously, unarmed as they were, and walking knowingly to their deaths. The mound, nest, hive, whatever, loomed like an apartment building-sized anthill. The surface was rigid and convoluted, a dull blackish gray with bits of lighter color here and there. As they drew nearer, Bueller saw that the lighter bits were bones, a lot of them skulls, all blended into the surface. "Damn," somebody said quietly. "Some kind of secretion, all right, with a little organic stuff mixed in for the hell of it." There was an oval-shaped entrance with a beaten path leading to it maybe 100 meters ahead. "I ain't going in there," Ramirez said. "Fuck this." But the trio of AirPods buzzing back and forth overhead like dragonflies meant otherwise. As if to confirm this, Bueller's comm came to life. "Move in," the voice said. And to punctuate the command, a thin green plasma beam splashed against the ground behind the squad, digging a small smoking crater into the stony surface. "Wonder how the other squads are doing," Chen said. "Who cares?" Ramirez said. "We're about to become history here." "This is what we came for," Bueller said. "Fuck that," Ramirez said. "We are supposed to be Marines, not bait." "I'm open to other ideas," Bueller said. The six of them moved toward the entrance of the mound. Once they were inside the place, maybe they could just squat down and not go in any deeper. "Right, Bueller. And the guy on the monitor'll go blind and not see from our cams that we're standing still." "So what can they do about it?" "They can fry us with the reflected plasma beam. That's what they can do about it." "Oh yeah, right. Or they can send one of the expendable androids down to hose us. Probably won't even have to get out of the AirPod. Like Ramirez said, we're history." The group reached the entrance. Bueller flicked his shoulder light on and took a deep breath. He stepped into the mound first. Whatever was going to happen was going to happen. Billy wound her way slowly from the kitchen to the hallway that led toward the ship's armory. A rolling pin and a peeler weren't going to get her very far against a ship full of armed men. She needed a gun, and a whole lot of good luck. Maybe even a miracle or two. Massey was staring through the holographic readouts when a tiny chime called for his attention. He focused on the screen. The 3 AirPods were holding over the entrance to the first mound. The other Marine squads hadn't made it to their destinations yet. What was... Doppler showed aircraft closing on the AirPods. Impossible. There wasn't any civilization on this world. The aliens couldn't have flying devices. Then he realized what was wrong with the images. No heat signatures, no power leakage, no radio or radar or Doppler. Either the craft were so primitive they had to be gliders, or... Massey blinked. "Team 1, he said. Alert!" The first wave of flying creatures dived onto the AirPods. The cameras caught and recorded the images. They looked reptilian, with grayish, scaled skin. They had delta-shaped wings that spanned at least 10 meters, short, sleek bodies, and elongated heads with rows of pointed teeth. Carnivores, definitely. There were a dozen in the first group, and they attacked soundlessly the 3 pods. The androids were good. Massey had to give them that. The plasma rifles lit and lines of green swept the air. The creatures fell and died as the high-energy beams cut off wings, slashed bodies, lopped heads. 9 of the things went down in the first 3 seconds as the 6 androids fired their weapons repeatedly, dodging in the agile little pods. But the second wave arrived, and there were too many. One of the things took a beam in the chest and was probably dead instantly, but slammed into a pod and knocked it sideways. Another attacker flew in while the pod was tumbling and showed how well those big toothy jaws worked when it bit an arm from one of the androids. The one flying the pod. The pod spiraled down toward the ground, 4 or 5 of the beasts following it in controlled dives. The other 2 pods were also in trouble. Flapping wings buffeted the androids as the things darted in and snapped at the heavy plastic, tore at it with taloned claws as if the pods were themselves alive. Plasma beams flashed. The flying monsters died under the flares of energy, but those who weren't hit kept attacking. One of the pods looked like a popcorn ball beset by a flock of starving crows. The plastic was pocked with gouges and bite marks, dented from impacts. The androids fought on, but they were losing. The first pod splatted against the ground, shattered, and hurled the two androids away from the impact. Almost instantly, the flying creatures were upon the androids, tearing at them, ripping limbs from torsos, spraying circulating fluid up in thin white fountains. They tore the androids apart, but didn't eat them. Apparently, they didn't much like the taste of artificial flesh. Massey watched, amazed, as one of the pods landed in a controlled dive and one of the androids leapt out and sprinted toward the mound. While the flying animals fell on the other android still trying to exit the pod, they did not pursue the fleeing one. They must have known what the aliens in the mounds were capable of. The running android neared the entrance. The third pod burst into flame while still 30 meters above the ground. By the time it crashed, both the passengers inside had been mostly consumed in the fire. One of the plasma rifles went critical in the heat, and a blinding green flash turned the pod into dust, along with 4 or 5 of the attackers who had followed it down too closely. How interesting, Massey thought. Surely there was a market for these things. Perhaps he could capture one. A baby, perhaps. But first, he had to protect his primary mission. He called the pods shepherding the other Marines. "Go immediately to first squad coordinates," he said. "What about the Marines here?" one of the androids asked. "Who cares? Do as I order. Keep a ground-hugging flight path. There are flying aliens here who will attack you. Get moving." He broke the calm and leaned back in his form chair. Yes, this was turning out to be more interesting than he had anticipated. Bueller heard the explosion and stopped. "What the hell?" Chen began. They were only 50 or 60 meters into the nest, and the devil they knew suddenly seemed less dangerous than the one they didn't. "Let's go see," Bueller said. "I'm with you, pal," Ramirez said. "I'll watch our rear," Mbutu said. She held a fist-sized rock in her hand. She waved the rock. Bueller had to laugh. Mbutu was crazy if she thought a rock was going to do her any good. Then again, any weapon was better than none. Bueller looked around for a stone of his own. Better to go down trying than not. What they saw was amazing. There were some kind of flying things flapping around like giant bats out there. All 3 pods were down, only one of them intact. And one of the androids was hauling ass toward the mound, moving at Olympic speed as he broken-stepped the rugged ground. He carried a plasma rifle in one hand. "Move back," Bueller said. "I think maybe some luck just went our way." "Maybe," Smith said from behind him. "What I want to know is how come the things who live here haven't swarmed all over us by now." "Don't look a gift horse in the mouth," Chen said. "What does that mean?" "It means be glad you're still sucking in the air," Chen said. "Such that it is." They watched the android run. One of the flying things made a half-hearted pass at him, swooping down like a giant raptor seeking prey. But the android dived flat and the thing missed by 10 meters anyhow. By the time it circled around for another try, the android was nearly at the mound's entrance. The flying thing must have decided it had business elsewhere. It soared upward, caught a thermal, and lifted away. "Get ready for company," Bueller said. The android reached the entrance and ran inside. He never had a chance. All 6 of the Marines hit him, and he sprawled under their combined weight, helpless. Now they had a weapon. It wasn't much, but it sure beat the alternatives. Billy returned to the armory where she and Mitch had been only a few hours past. There were weapons aplenty, but after examining several of them, she realized they were all missing the same part. She mentally shrugged and slung one of the carbines over her shoulder, collected a couple of spare magazines and a flex belt of grenades. Maybe she could find the part to fix it. Or maybe she could bluff somebody into thinking it was workable, or threaten to blow up the ship with a grenade. If she was up against it and going to die anyway, what the hell? She'd have nothing to lose, especially if something had happened to Mitch. Bueller said, "All right, Blake, you're the best shot in the squad. You get the plasma rifle." She nodded, took the weapon, and did a quick inspection. "Got almost full charge," she said. 35 shots. "If you have to use them, make them count," Bueller said. "He's got a sidearm, too." That from Smith. "Better let me have it," Bueller said. No offense, Bueller, but who died and left you in charge? We're all the same rank here since Easley bought it. I outscored everybody in pistol qualification. Yeah, Smith, Mbutu said. You couldn't hit a tank at arm's length with a sidearm. Yeah, well, okay, fine, Smith said. I was just checking, you know. Bueller took the pistol, a standard 10mm caseless slug thrower. It used ammunition close to that of the carbines, except that it was less powerful. And in a pinch, it could be made to fire the heavier stuff, if he didn't mind risking that the pistol would most likely blow up after 5 or 6 shots. Okay, pal, Bueller said to the captured android. Let's you and us talk. Wasting your time, the android said. I'm no good as a hostage. I'm expendable, and my clock is running down. I'm dead in a couple weeks, no matter what. You could have a real miserable couple of weeks, though, Mbutu said, hefting her rock. The android shook its head. I don't know anything either. Massey runs the show, and he keeps it to himself. We get what he wants us to get, nothing more. Blake kicked the pinned android, hitting his hip with her boot. Fine, she said. Let's kill him now. Go ahead, Mbutu. Bust his head with your rock. No point in wasting a bullet or a charge on him. Ease off, Blake, Bueller said. This guy came out of the vats and got programmed for this. It's not his fault. Not everybody gets a choice. Blake stared at Bueller. Yeah, I guess I hear that. I hate to point this out, but I hear something coming this way from inside the nest, Smith said. And even a plasma rifle won't stop a whole herd of these bugs. What say we go play outside? Bueller glanced down the corridor. He heard the rattle of alien feet and claws on the material. Let's move it, people. Get to the downed pods. There might be more guns or supplies. Something. And then go where? The android asked. You're trapped on the planet without pods or an APC. Maybe so, pal, but we ain't trapped in this anthill. Let's go, Marines. Nobody needed to be told again. Billy moved carefully through the ship, hiding when she heard people approaching. She had the carbine over her shoulder and clutched the rolling pin and peeler in her hands. She kept moving away from the noises and boot falls until she realized she was in the ship's crew and commanding officer's quarters. She snaked her way around doorways and stayed flat against the walls, edging along, trying to stay invisible. If somebody should see her, she would be in deep shit in a real hurry. Ahead was Stephen's cabin, and something drew Billy that way. He wouldn't be using it. One of the bodies she'd seen spaced had been the colonel. Surprised her that he would die defending the ship, but maybe she'd read him wrong. As Billy approached the door, it started to open. Damn, somebody was inside. She glanced up and down the corridor. She'd never get clear in time. Whoever came out of Stephen's cabin would see her before she could get back to cover. If he was armed, she'd catch one in the back. Billy raised the rolling pin, triggered the freezer, and flattened herself against the wall to the right of the sliding door. She hoped it was only one of them. As the man stepped out into the corridor, Billy swung the rolling pin. The liquid inside hadn't solidified yet, but the pin was still heavy. She smashed the pin into the man's head, angled just over his left ear. She put her shoulder and back into it. It was a good swing, powered further by her fear. The thick plastic shattered as it met bone, probably cracking the skull as well. Viscous blue coolant splashed from the broken pin, covering the man's face with cold globules. He didn't go down. He staggered, slammed into the door jamb, and wobbled, but he didn't go down. Billy stepped in and drove her left hand at the man's belly, just below the sternum. The peeler sank into his flesh all the way to her hand. White fluid sprayed from the wound onto her as she jerked the peeler out. Android blood, she realized, as she tried for the second stab. He was an artificial person. The android managed to twist and slap at her hand, practically deflecting the second thrust, so it missed his solar plexus and skidded over his ribs, gouging chunks of his uniform and flesh out, leaving a shallow ditch that stretched from the center of his chest almost to his shoulder. The coolant from the rolling pin clouded his vision, though, and his own punch missed Billy by a hair. As he wiped at his eyes, it gave Billy enough time for one more shot. If she didn't drop him with it, He would have her. Even a wounded android was still stronger than an ordinary human. Billy jabbed, a long stroke, aiming at his eye. Growing up in a hospital, you learned something about anatomy. The eyes were the easiest path through the skull to the brain. The peeler hit just under her target, bounced up, and sank through the softer eye tissue. Jelly oozed from the ruined eye as the peeler went in. The android jerked away from Billy, reached up with both hands, and jerked the peeler out. The serrated edge brought most of the eye out with it, clearing the socket until milky white circulating fluid welled and spilled. He stood here for what seemed a long time, then collapsed. He didn't say anything, not even a groan, just dropped as if his bones had vanished, and died. Billy's heart raced, pounding as though trying to dig its way out of her body. She still held part of the shattered rolling pin in her right hand. She let it fall. The clatter it made seemed loud in the corridor. Her first reaction was to turn and run, but she didn't. Instead, she wondered why the android had been in Stephen's cabin. Inside, she figured it out. The parts missing from the carbines were stacked neatly in rows on the colonel's bed. Who would have put them there? Somebody had sabotaged the weapons, and it looked like she had found out who. Why had he done it? It didn't matter. She could worry about that later. Right now, she had other things on her mind. Billy picked up one of the feed ramps, stripped the receiver on her weapon, and replaced the missing part. She snapped the connector into place, and the ramp toggled through a diagnostic code and then clicked into place. She shoved a magazine into the carbine, touched the bolt control, and cycled around into the firing chamber. The magazine's counter showed 99 anti-personnel rounds remaining. Billy smiled. It was tight, but she felt a lot better. If the head shrinkers in the clinic could see her now, they'd really have something to worry about. Good God, it's a crazy woman with a gun. Damn straight. And if anybody gave her any shit, she was going to invite them onto the dance floor for a fast and deadly tattoo tango. Wilkes. She would go find Wilkes and get him loose. He'd know how to handle this. And once she got Wilkes, they could collect Mitch and get the hell out of this mess. Maybe it wasn't the best plan in the universe, but it would do for now. She hoped.